In 1984, an 8-year-old boy named Jonah Wells vanished during an overnight sleep study at St. Augustine Psychiatric Hospital. His bed was empty. His chart showed a flat line at 2:42 a.m., and a single VHS tape, later recovered, captured him jolting upright, whispering one phrase, "He's here." 40 years later, a retired nurse finds that missing footage inside an unmarked envelope, and what it reveals reopens the most disturbing case in hospital history. What they discover beneath the abandoned sleep lab will haunt you forever. If you're drawn to cold cases, shocking discoveries, and hidden rooms beneath forgotten places, subscribe for more real story-inspired mysteries brought to life. June 3rd, 2024. Location: Portland, Oregon. Retirement sale, Box 12. A retired nurse cleaning out her attic finds a dusty VHS labeled only with the number 241. It's from her last night shift at St. Augustine Psychiatric Hospital, closed in 1986 and long since demolished. When she plays it, she sees a young boy asleep, then jolting upright, then whispering something. Static takes over. The timestamp reads 2:42 a.m., June 8th, 1984. His name was Jonah Wells. He was never seen again. June 3rd, 2024. Location: Portland, Oregon. The tape clicked into place with a soft, mechanical hum. Angela Mercer hadn't heard that sound in years. The whir of an aging VHS deck eating a cassette whole. Dust plumed from the top of the machine like it was exhaling. The small boxy television flickered to life in static, then cut to a blue screen. She leaned closer. Arthritis made her fingers stiff, but they still knew what they were doing. After 42 years as a night nurse, most of them spent in the locked wards of St. Augustine Psychiatric, Angela had seen more than her share of strange things. But this tape was different. This one was personal. She had found it 30 minutes ago inside an unmarked moving box from her attic. Box 12-1986, it read in faded Sharpie. The box was supposed to contain inventory records from the hospital's closure. What she'd found instead was a single unlabeled tape in a brown paper sleeve and a memo slip with a date, June 8th, 1984. The night Jonah Wells disappeared. Angela had been on duty that night. She'd worked the sleep lab rotation. She remembered the storm, the power outage, the screams from the observation hallway. But she didn't remember a camera being left on. And yet, here it was. The tape crackled. The blue screen faded into a grainy, black and white image of a small hospital room. A single bed. A boy asleep. His name tag visible on the table beside him, Wells, J. 1426. Angela sat back slowly, the skin on her arms prickling. She didn't breathe. Jonah was curled on his side beneath a thermal blanket, electrodes taped across his forehead and temples. A blinking red light from the EEG monitor pulsed faintly in the corner of the frame. The machine captured brain activity in real time. Angela recognized the model, outdated even in the 80s. The timestamp in the bottom corner ticked forward, 2:41 a.m. Then something changed. Jonah flinched. Not a twitch, a full-body jolt, like someone had shocked him awake. His eyes opened wide. His mouth moved, but no sound came out. He sat up too quickly, as if startled by something off-screen. Then he whispered, "He's here." Static swallowed the rest. Angela slammed the pause button. Her heart hammered against her ribcage. She didn't remember this part. She wasn't supposed to remember this part. Across town, in a soundproofed basement studio in northwest Portland, Lillian Hart stared at her monitor. The waveform of her next episode crawled across the screen, waiting to be trimmed and narrated. Her true crime podcast, Dark Hours, specialized in medical cold cases, obscure disappearances, forgotten files, and recently, reopened psychiatric cases tied to experimental sleep studies in the 1970s and 80s. The story of Jonah Wells was supposed to be a one-off, a throwaway mystery file for Season 4. The boy had disappeared during a routine sleep study in 1984 at St. Augustine, a crumbling, now demolished psychiatric facility in East Portland. All that remained of the hospital were old brick foundations and bad memories. No body, no trace. Just a chart with a flat EEG line recorded at 2:42 a.m. and a hallway camera that never caught a soul leaving the room. Lillian had uncovered whispers, nurses who'd quit abruptly, an internal memo warning about neurological instability in patients exposed to REM view interventions. It all sounded like conspiracy theory bait, until today. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She let it ring once, then again. She didn't answer unknowns. Until she saw the message. "I have the Jonah tape. I worked that night. My name is Angela Mercer. Call me." Lillian stared at the name. Angela Mercer, sleep tech, retired RN. She'd tried to find her months ago but assumed she was dead. She hit call. Angela answered on the first ring. "Are you the girl who's been digging up St. Augustine?" "I prefer investigative podcaster," Lillian said, grabbing a notebook. "But yes." "You need to come here," Angela said, voice trembling slightly. "I have the tape. I saw it with my own eyes. Jonah, he says something. It's time-stamped. 2:42 a.m. Lillian's spine straightened. "You're sure?" He sits up, and he speaks, but the feed cuts out right after. "I worked that night. I monitored room 6D, but I never saw that part. That footage wasn't in the official review." "You think someone cut it?" Angela was quiet. Then, "I think someone buried it." 2 hours later, Lillian pulled into Angela's narrow driveway in a quiet stretch of southeast Portland. The sky was dimming to gray. Her car tires crunched on gravel, the kind that never stopped creaking. Angela met her at the door with a blanket around her shoulders and a shoebox under one arm. Her hands trembled, but her voice was steady. "I shouldn't have this," she said. "It was misfiled during closure. The hospital locked everything after Jonah vanished, said it was an electrical failure, but this tape was never reviewed. It was logged and sealed. They told us it was blank." She opened the box and handed over the VHS. It was old, worn smooth from time. "Why now?" Lillian asked. Angela looked up, pale and exhausted. "Because I remember something I wasn't supposed to. That night, when I ran down the hall after the monitor went dead, I heard something behind the wall. Voices? No." She swallowed. "Breathing." Lillian brought the tape home, carefully converting it to digital format using her studio setup. She watched the same segment Angela described. Jonah jolting upright, whispering something, then the tape cutting out. But now, frame by frame, she saw something else. A flicker. A shape. Behind Jonah's bed, at the far right of the screen, something moved in the shadows. She zoomed in. Too blurry to make out, but not nothing. Lillian stared at the paused frame, Jonah's mouth open in mid-word, his eyes wide with knowing terror. The timestamp read, 2:42 a.m. She pressed rewind, then play, and this time she turned up the volume. Behind Jonah's whisper, beneath the static, there was something else. A second voice. Not a whisper. Not human. She hit pause. Her reflection looked back at her through the screen. Then the lights in her studio flickered, and the waveform on her computer began recording, on its own. June 4th, 2024. Location, Portland, Oregon. Lillian Hart's apartment studio. The waveform kept recording. Lillian stared at the monitor, frozen, as the timeline dragged forward in real time, without her touching anything. She hadn't pressed record. She hadn't even opened the software for live audio. But it was recording now. and it was capturing something. White noise hissed through her speakers, low, rhythmic, layered with a faint pulsing sound beneath it, like breathing. Not natural breath, mechanical, deliberate. Lillian muted her speakers. The waveform continued. She stood slowly, unplugged the mic, shut down the interface. The recording stopped. Her studio fell silent. The only sound was her own breath, short and shallow. She moved quickly, locking the door, pulling the blinds, double-checking the window latch. She knew the rule. When the story starts digging back, it's time to double-check the locks. That night, she couldn't sleep. Her mind kept replaying the frame. Jonah Wells at age 8, whispering, "He's here." His face lit only by the faint red glow of the EEG monitor, the electrodes like ghost wires across his temple. She couldn't shake the timestamp, 2:42 a.m. In all her research, she'd seen that time pop up before, in archived nurse reports, in partial files, in the official case summary. But it had always seemed coincidental. A moment when the equipment failed, an error in power delivery, maybe even an electrical storm glitch. Now it felt like a signature. June 5th, 2024, Oregon State Health Archives. The receptionist barely looked up. Name: Lillian Hart, researcher, here for closed case records. I submitted my request last week. The woman tapped at her keyboard, unimpressed. What case? St. Augustine Psychiatric, sleep studies, specifically patient file number 1426. The woman paused. Her fingers hovered just above the keyboard, then slowly lowered. That hospital was condemned in 1986. Most of their records are sealed. I have provisional access, FOIA clearance and a signed waiver from the estate of Angela Mercer. She worked there. She's assisting in a review of retained property. The receptionist narrowed her eyes. Wait here. 10 minutes passed. Lillian waited in a small lobby filled with forgotten filing cabinets and the smell of decaying paper. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Dust motes danced in the yellow glow like lazy fireflies. Finally, a woman in a gray vest returned holding a thin red folder. This is the only remaining hard copy from that series, File 1426, Jonah Wells. Everything else was digitized or, frankly, lost in the 1991 flood. Flood? Lillian asked. Pipe burst, sub-level storage. Half the St. Augustine archive drowned. She handed over the folder. Be careful. That paper's older than it looks. Inside, Lillian found less than 20 pages. Jonah's intake form. Standard psychiatric intake for a juvenile. Noted anxiety. Night terrors. No history of trauma. No known developmental issues. Recommended for sleep monitoring due to reports of incidents during REM stage 4. She flipped to the progress chart. The notes were erratic. June 5th, 1984, 9:02 p.m. Subject asleep. Baseline established. EEG patterns irregular but stable. Heart rate elevated. June 6th, 1984, 2:42 a.m. Significant disruption. Heart rate spike. Subject sits upright. Verbal utterance. He's here. EEG signal flatlines. Room power fails. Lillian's finger stopped on that line. Flatlines. Jonah's brain activity stopped for several seconds, then returned. The note ends with, no physical explanation. Recovered within 30 seconds. Subject appeared unaware of event. Except the next entry is even shorter. June 7th, 1984, 10:11 a.m. Subject missing. All exits secured. No footage recovered. That was it. The file ends there. No police report, no follow-up. Just a red-stamped word across the bottom of the final page. Redacted. Lillian scanned the pages on her portable feed scanner and left the archive with her head buzzing. She didn't go home. She drove. Her next stop was a vacant lot in East Portland, overgrown with weeds and littered with graffiti-covered concrete. It had once been St. Augustine Psychiatric Hospital. The main structure had been demolished in 1986 after an internal fire in the West Wing, officially labeled uninhabitable. But beneath the lot, according to archived blueprints, were service tunnels, boiler rooms, and at least one sealed medical corridor, and the sleep lab had been in the north basement. She found the edge of the foundation, sections of the old building's sublevel still poked through the grass. She circled the perimeter, found a slab with rusted hinges, an old coal chute or access panel. She pried it open. The tunnel beneath stank of mildew and rot. She clicked on her flashlight. The beam caught decades of dust and a narrow ladder descending into blackness. Lillian checked her phone. No signal. She hit record on her body cam, slung her messenger bag over her shoulder, and climbed down. The air was dead down there. Not stale. Dead, like it had been sealed too long. Her boots crunched on debris. The corridor stretched left and right, peeling paint, cracked tile, water stains. The pipes above her head creaked from temperature change. She walked slowly. One door on the right had a metal plate. 6. She froze. This was the room. She turned the handle. It gave way easily. Inside, the room was almost empty. Just a bed frame. Scrape marks on the floor. An old EEG monitor pushed against the wall, disconnected. The wires dangled like veins. On the wall above the bed, in peeling blue crayon, a child had written something. "Don't blink at 2:42. Lillian's skin crawled. She panned her flashlight toward the corner of the room. A vent, loosely bolted, slightly ajar. Something glinted inside. She knelt, reached in, and pulled it out. A cassette tape, hand-labeled in shaky writing. Jonah, Night 2. She climbed back up, heart hammering in her throat. Back in her car, she stared at the tape. Where had it come from? Who had hidden it? Why was it not in the archive? She drove straight home and hooked up her old cassette deck, inserted the tape, rewound, pressed play. A boy's voice filled the room. "Jonah. Testing. This is Jonah. I don't want to do this again. They say it's just dreaming, but it's not. He watches when I sleep. He waits for the red light, and when it hits 2:42, he climbs out." There was a pause. Then, "He smells like smoke in winter. And he doesn't blink." Silence. Then the tape warbled, distorted, like the recorder had malfunctioned. But there was one last whisper. "I'm still here." Lillian turned off the player, her hands shaking. She knew two things now with certainty. Jonah Wells didn't just disappear. Someone else was watching that night. And if Jonah's voice could survive the fire, maybe Jonah himself had too. June 6th, 2024. Location, East Portland, site of former St. Augustine Psychiatric Hospital. Lillian returned to the site just after sunrise. The streets were still wet from last night's storm. Fog clung to the ground like something alive, curling around her boots as she stepped from the car. In her bag, flashlight, gloves, body cam, backup batteries, crowbar, notebook, and the cassette. Jonah's voice looped in her head like a prayer. He waits for the red light, and when it hits 2:42, he climbs out. She wasn't here to record. She wasn't here to theorize. She needed answers. The blueprints of St. Augustine had been incomplete. Scans of old, water-damaged microfilm. But from what she could tell, the West Wing had been part of the hospital's experimental treatment area. Sleep study, electrotherapies, and juvenile containment. None of it made it into the official health department report when the hospital shuttered. The fire gave the board the perfect excuse to bulldoze what was left and bury the rest. Except they hadn't buried everything. Lillian found the second access point behind a bramble-covered chain-link fence. Hidden beneath a collapsed service stairwell, she uncovered a hatched door crusted with rust and overgrowth. The hinges screamed as she forced it open. The air that rushed out was fetid, like something long dead finally exhaled. She descended slowly, the steps slick with moss and condensation. Her boots sank into damp earth at the bottom. The flashlight beam danced across broken tiles and scorched concrete. The corridor ahead sloped downward, a faint incline that hadn't shown on the plans. This part of the hospital hadn't just been forgotten. It had been intentionally sealed. She moved slowly, passing hollow rooms where treatment beds once sat beneath cracked mirrors. Doors hung off their hinges. Old fourth poles lay bent in the corners like bones. Then she saw it. A scorched metal placard bolted to the wall. The letters half melted, but still readable. Observation. Ward, Rempfer. She stopped. This was it. The hallway narrowed. Her light caught a second sign. D-Wing, patient access restricted. And below that, scratched into the wall in jagged fingernail marks, "Don't sleep here." The corridor ended at a blackened steel door. She tested the handle. Locked tight. She backed up and struck it with the crowbar. The clang echoed like gunfire down the hall. It took 3 strikes before the latch gave. The door creaked inward. Beyond it was a dark chamber. Not a patient room, not an office, a monitoring station. 6 chairs faced a bank of dead screens. Burnt wires hung from the ceiling like veins. Broken reels of magnetic tape lay scattered across the floor. On the wall was a command line interface, charred but still semi-legible. The power was long gone, but something told her these monitors had once displayed live feeds. She moved toward the far end of the room, where a shattered 2-way mirror revealed the other side. A padded sleep chamber, larger than the others. A surgical-grade cot sat bolted in the center. Black straps hung loose at the sides. Paint peeled from the ceiling. A blood-stained EEG strip curled in the dust like a snake. Room D4. Lillian stepped through the broken mirror into the chamber. A chill settled in her bones. Not from the temperature, but from a feeling. As if the walls remembered everything. The light caught on deep scratches in the far wall, tally marks, dozens, no hundreds. Someone had counted the nights. She raised the body cam, whispered into the mic. Subject room appears to be a high-security observation site for REM-4 sleep trials. Based on layout, the patient was fully restrained. No documentation, no identifiers, suggests secrecy or containment. Then she noticed the hatch, low to the ground, rusted shut, half buried in wall paneling with insulation peeled back. She pried it open. Behind it, a small cavity, and inside the cavity, wrapped in a yellowed towel, was a videotape, labeled in fading red ink, JW, Night 3, STG restricted. Her heart skipped. She tucked the tape into her bag and began backing out, slowly, carefully. She didn't notice the shadow on the far wall until it moved. She spun, light sweeping the room, empty, but she heard it now, breathing, not hers, shallow, just behind her. She turned, nothing except. One of the EEG monitors in the hall flickered. No power, no batteries, no feed. But it blinked once. Red. 2:42. She ran. By the time she burst into daylight, gasping for air, her shirt was soaked through. The hatch slammed behind her, and she didn't stop moving until she reached the car. She drove with white knuckles all the way back to her studio. That night, she digitized the tape. It was degraded, static-lined, warped audio, but functional. She scrubbed through the corrupted segments until an image appeared. Jonah, age 8, eyes half shut, breathing slow. The timestamp read, June 9th, 1984, 2:41 a.m. He stirred, flinched, sat up, and then something new. A whispered voice off-screen. "You're not done yet, Jonah." Jonah's face twisted, not in fear, in recognition. "No," he whispered. "I did what you said." The voice again. "One more time, then you wake up." Jonah looked at the camera. He said I'd never wake up again. Then the screen cut to black, and one word burned into the lower corner of the frame. Repeating. Lillian sat frozen. Something was wrong with this footage. It wasn't just a looped recording. It was a pattern. 2:42 a.m. Jonah sits up. He whispers. The screen cuts. It repeats. Not once, not twice, 13 times. She checked the tape's metadata, cross-referenced the frame timing. The footage recycled, but not cleanly. Each time Jonah looked slightly different, his face more gaunt, his mouth less responsive. By the final loop, his eyes barely opened at all. She scrubbed frame by frame until the last shot. Jonah no longer faced the camera. He looked directly at the wall, and behind the wall, a shadow moved. Not a man, not a child. Something hunched, long-limbed, crawling. The red light blinked. 2:42:06. Then, static. Lillian clicked off the monitor and stood in the silence of her apartment. Something was happening, something still tied to that room, to that hour, and she was starting to believe what Jonah had said on that cassette. I'm still here. June 7th, 2024. Location: Portland State University, Department of Sleep Neuroscience. Lillian sat in the narrow guest chair across from Dr. Elise Rourke, a sleep neurologist known for her work with abnormal REM states and trauma-induced insomnia. Her office smelled like whiteboard ink and lemon hand sanitizer. On the walls, framed journal covers and a full-body sleep cycle diagram. Lillian slid the printed EEG logs across the desk, those brief spikes from Jonah Wells in 1984. The same ones that flatlined at 2:42 a.m. and resumed 33 seconds later. Dr. Rourke leaned in. Where did you get this? From a sealed file, St. Augustine Hospital. The name alone pulled a slight frown from the doctor. I've only heard of St. Augustine from ethics seminars, Rourke said carefully. It was one of the early testing grounds for REM manipulation research. They didn't call it that, of course. They said it was a facility for studying night terrors in children. But from what I've read, it was far from humane. Lillian nodded. This child, Jonah, disappeared during one of their studies. She pulled out the digitized screenshots from the videotape. Jonah asleep, then upright, then whispering. Timestamp, 2:42 a.m. Then she showed the loop. Rourke blinked, mouth tightening. This is not normal, and it's not a glitch. That repetition, something's re-recording over it. The data is fractured, altered. And what about the flat line? The neurologist tapped her pen. REM sleep comes in 4 stages. Stage 4 is the deepest, where dreams become immersive and the body enters a paralyzed state. If that stage is interrupted, in theory, the brain can misfire. Disconnect. Disconnect how? In healthy subjects, the EEG never flatlines unless the body is dead. But under extreme neurological trauma, or forced stimulus in REM, it's possible the brain enters a type of protective shutdown. It looks like death, but it's not. Lillian leaned forward. What would cause a child's brain to do that? Rourke didn't answer immediately. Then she pushed the EEG toward Lillian and said, quietly, fear. Sustained, repeated trauma during REM can fracture a child's perception of reality. If the child believes what's happening is real, it might as well be. Lillian stepped out of the office into the warm Portland afternoon, her thoughts unraveling. She walked toward her car slowly, the tape loop still playing in her mind. 2:42. Jonah sits up. He whispers, "He's here." And then it repeats. The boy had lived inside his own nightmare, replayed like a film reel. The word on the final loop, repeating, wasn't a description. It was a diagnosis. That night she went back to her studio, re-watched the full video again, on loop, 13 repetitions. She charted each one side by side, noticed slight differences, posture, lighting, even the shape of Jonah's face. Then she ran the final audio through her noise reduction filter. Buried beneath the hiss, layered low, was another voice, distorted, mechanical. She isolated it, ran it through a recompiler, and heard, "Don't wake him, not yet." June 7th, 2024, 11:45 p.m. Angela Mercer called again. "I remembered something else," she said. Her voice was flat, distant. "I've been trying not to think about that night for 40 years, but it's coming back now, piece by piece, like old film developing in the dark." "What did you remember?" Lillian asked. "There were 2 boys that night, not 1. Jonah was the primary study subject in room 6D, yes, but there was another child, a floater, non-consenting, no documentation." Lillian's breath caught. "Wait, another patient?" "They called him a control subject. He was sedated and placed into an unlit room next to Jonah's. No EEG, no monitoring, just observation. They said he'd help us track neurological echoes." "Echoes?" Angela hesitated. "They believed dreams could imprint across proximity, that if a child entered REM 4 while another slept nearby, the brainwaves could synchronize, share fears, share experiences, like mirrors." Lillian stared at her notes, pen trembling in her fingers. "Do you remember the second boy's name?" Angela's voice came back barely above a whisper. "Number. But I remember his scream." At 12:42 a.m., Lillian opened the digital tape loop again. She watched it full screen, and this time she noticed something. On loop 7, behind Jonah, in the very back corner of the screen, 2 blinking lights. Very faint, too low to be equipment. She zoomed in and realized they were eyes. June 8th, 2024. Location, Oregon City. Assisted living facility. Room 214. The hallway smelled like cinnamon oatmeal and bleach. Lillian kept her shoulders straight as she passed faded family portraits and residents wheeling slowly through the quiet. Room 214 was at the far end, its door slightly ajar. A soft murmur came from inside, a television playing an old sitcom, volume too low to hear clearly. Angela Mercer sat in an armchair, half shadowed by drawn curtains, her gray cardigan folded neatly in her lap. Her hands were shaking. Lillian knocked gently. "You said you remembered more." Angela didn't smile, didn't rise. She only nodded and motioned for Lillian to come in. "I lied back then," she said softly, her voice thin. "We all did. It was easier than saying we were afraid." In 1984, Angela had been 31 years old, night shift nurse, sleep lab rotation. She was responsible for prepping EEG machines, logging REM phases, and reporting irregularities to the attending physician. On the night of June 8th, she'd been assigned to 2 observation rooms, 6D and 6E, but she'd only admitted one of those assignments in her statement. "The logs say you were only overseeing Jonah," Lillian said. Angela looked up. "That's what I told them." "Why?" Angela's eyes glassed over. "Because room 6E didn't exist on the blueprints. No door from the main hallway, just an internal passage from the monitoring room. I was told not to mention it. They called it a shadow room." Lillian blinked. A shadow room. They'd use it when testing for co-dreaming phenomena. The belief was, if you place 2 children near one another in deep REM, they might begin to dream together. Not just parallel sleep. Something more. Entanglement. Lillian sat forward. Jonah was one of them. Who was the other? Angela looked down. He didn't have a name, just a number, patient B. I don't think he was local. His intake papers were incomplete, sedated, unresponsive. And what happened to him? Angela's voice dropped. He woke up before Jonah, but not like a child, like something wearing a child's face. Angela had only told part of the story in 1984. The storm that night had knocked out half the east wing. Power flickered. Backup generators kicked in. At 2:42 a.m., the monitor watching Jonah had flatlined. She and the attending physician, Dr. Cass, rushed in. The boy was gone. But something else had happened minutes earlier, something they didn't report. "I was in the control room, watching the feeds," Angela said. "Room 6E was supposed to be audio only, no video, but someone had wired a hidden camera. I saw it with my own eyes." Lillian's pulse quickened. "What did you see?" Angela turned toward the muted television, her voice barely audible. He was already standing, awake, but his eyes, they didn't move. Not like ours. They rolled the wrong way, and he started whispering a name over and over. "Jonah. Jonah. Jonah." Like he knew him? Angela nodded. Like he was calling him, luring him. Did Jonah respond? I don't know. The feed cut out, but when I got to room 6D, he was already gone. The bed was still warm. The straps were undone. Lillian scribbled furiously in her notebook. What did the hospital do? They told us to deny the second room existed, that the patient was never admitted, that Jonah was an isolated incident. We were threatened, careers, licenses, everything. And patient B? Angela's voice broke. They said he died during a failed REM re-entry, but I heard him screaming after they wheeled him away. Lillian left the facility in silence, the tape recorder in her pocket still running. Outside, a summer wind carried the smell of rain and asphalt. Somewhere nearby, church bells rang the hour. 2:42 p.m. She felt her stomach twist. Back home, she opened the digitized file of Loop 9 from Jonah's video. Frame by frame, she tracked the flickering light in the back corner, those blinking eyes. Not reflections, not machine indicators. Pupil dilation, vertical movement. Someone, or something, was watching Jonah from inside the wall. She ran the audio through a spectrogram visualizer. At precisely 2:42 and 6, the waveform bent, warped into a vertical spike. The program labeled it ultrasonic frequency range, human incompatible. And then deep in the frequency layer, another voice emerged. Not Jonah's, not patient B. Welcome back. Lillian felt the hair rise on the back of her neck. Jonah had entered a loop. A dream he couldn't wake from. But he hadn't been alone. Patient B wasn't just another child. He'd become something else. And whatever welcomed Jonah at 2:42 a.m. still lingered in that basement. Angela's final words that night echoed in Lillian's mind. There wasn't just one monster in St. Augustine. There was a system built to feed it. June 9th, 2024. Location, St. Augustine Sleep Lab Ruins, north basement level. The key was rusted, but it turned. Lillian had found it inside an envelope marked Retired 1985 Observation Keys in a forgotten city archive box. The tag read simply, 6D, do not duplicate. The metal was blackened from age, and somehow, she knew, it would still fit. She hadn't told anyone where she was going. Not Angela, not the podcast audience, not even her producer. She parked 2 blocks from the overgrown lot and hiked in alone, flashlight and camera gear strapped to her back. It was just after midnight when she reached the hatch. The coal chute was still open from her last visit. This time, she didn't hesitate. She climbed down into the dark. The hallway to room 6D was colder than it had been before. The air stilled around her, unnaturally quiet, like the sound had been drained. Her boots echoed louder than they should have. She passed the scorched REM4 monitor station and reached the familiar scorched door. Room 6D. Lillian paused. Her hand trembled on the key. Then, she turned it. The door opened without a sound. The room was mostly as she'd left it. Cracked tiles, peeling paint, the rusted frame of Jonah's bed. But something was different now. The scent. It wasn't mildew anymore. It was iron. Blood. She stepped inside slowly, flashlight sweeping the walls. The tally marks were back, but multiplied. Where once there had been maybe a few hundred, now there were thousands, carved deep, new. Some still bleeding at the edges like the paint hadn't dried. She stepped closer to examine them, and that's when her light caught movement. A mirror high on the far wall, blackened with age but intact, and in the mirror's reflection, for a fraction of a second, she saw Jonah, not as a child, not alive, but watching her. She spun. Nothing, but something scratched softly behind her. Stone on stone, like something crawling inside the wall. She activated the body cam and whispered into her mic. Room 6D, signs of new carvings. Mirror with visual anomaly. Possible movement in ventilation or behind walls. She turned back to the wall and slowly examined the area beneath the mirror. That's when she saw the seam, a thin vertical slit near the floor. She dropped to her knees, pulled at it. It was a trap door. Beneath it, a narrow crawl space. Inside, film canisters, labeled in pencil. JW6D Loop 14, PB Side B Unstable. Control Study Number 2, Failure. No REM, do not wake. Lillian reached for the first canister when she heard the sound. Breathing, behind her. She turned, fast. The door had closed, and in the mirror, Jonah was back, but his face was wrong now. Not scared. Smiling. She fled the room. Film clutched in one hand, flashlight beam slicing through the dark as she ran back through the corridor. Her foot caught on something. She went down hard, scraping her elbow. Behind her, footsteps. She crawled to her feet, pushed through the scorched monitoring station, up the chute, back into the night. By the time she got home, she'd stopped shaking. She laid the canisters out on her desk, breath shallow. She hadn't imagined it. She'd seen the face, the smile, the tally marks, the whisper. Don't wake him. Not yet. The next day, she took the film to a professional media restoration lab. They cleaned it, transferred it digitally. She watched the recovered footage late that night. The video opened with a wide shot of Jonah sleeping, camera panning slowly, then cutting, looping. But at loop 14, something was different. This time, he didn't whisper. He screamed. A sound so guttural, so inhuman, that the speakers clipped. His body arched unnaturally, eyes rolled back, and for a moment, his EEG monitor flatlined, then reversed. Lillian paused the video, zoomed in. The readout wasn't just flat. It was playing backward. She opened the next reel. PB, Side B, Unstable. The footage was darker, poor quality, barely lit, but a boy sat in the corner, facing the wall. Same age as Jonah, no name tag, and on his arm, carved into the skin, were words. I saw myself wake up, but I wasn't me. The boy turned, slowly. His eyes were completely black. Lillian ended the playback. She was drenched in sweat. She finally understood what Room 6D really was. Not a treatment room. A gateway. Whatever the REM4 experiments had triggered, it had pulled Jonah into something else, and patient B had come back wrong. In her notes, she underlined the phrase from Angela. A system built to feed it. She crossed out system and wrote, a pattern. Then she opened the raw audio from loop 14 and played it backwards. Buried in the distortion, a new phrase emerged. He wakes when the wall forgets his name. June 10th, 2024. Location, Portland, Oregon. Dark Hours Studio. The map on Lillian's wall was covered in pins. Red for sightings, yellow for victims, black for disappearances. At the center of it all, St. Augustine Psychiatric Hospital. The now bulldozed epicenter of what was no longer just a mystery. It was a pattern. She stood in front of it, connecting the dots. 10 missing children between 1982 and 1986. 3 officially linked to St. Augustine's pediatric studies. The rest were written off as runaways, custody disputes, or internal psychiatric transfers. None of them resurfaced, and none of their files listed a time of disappearance. But she found it in the incident reports, a time stamp, 2:42 a.m. every time. She sat down at her desk, microphone arm already extended, the red light blinking. She wasn't recording for public release. Not yet. This one was for her files, for when someone would eventually have to make sense of it all. Entry log, June 10th, 2024. Working theory update. The time 2:42 a.m. appears in 9 out of 10 child disappearance reports tied to St. Augustine and adjacent facilities. EEG recordings show neurological suppression or blackout periods at this time, exclusively during REM-4 cycles. The phenomenon has no current medical explanation, but the tapes show something else. The children react to something they see. Off-screen. She paused the recording, rubbed her temples, then reopened the video labeled Loop 14, JW. The footage opened as before, Jonah asleep, the red EEG monitor flashing, 2:41:59, 2:42:00. Lillian slowed the frame rate to 1 frame per second, and that's when she saw it. In frame 2:42:04, something passes across the mirror in room 6D. Not a reflection. A shape, long arms, bent spine, head tilted like it didn't understand how necks were supposed to move. Then it was gone, but Jonah saw it. His eyes opened, pupils dilated. He whispered again, "He's here." Lillian leaned back from the screen. This wasn't sleep paralysis. This wasn't psychosis. It was real enough to be shared across multiple children, different beds, different years, the same hour, the same whispered phrase. And always, the mirror. She revisited the photo archive from St. Augustine's closure. Dozens of black and white images, abandoned rooms, medical records, staff portraits. Most were innocuous. But in one photo, Group B Sleep Wing, 1983, she spotted something. In the background, reflected in the polished glass of a medicine cabinet. A face, pale, slightly blurred. Watching the camera, she blew it up. Zoomed. Not a nurse. Not a patient. The eyes weren't human. She cross-referenced the term mirror hallucination in REM-4 studies. One research paper, declassified in 1997, stood out. Project ORPHEUS, Sleep State Cognitive Echoes in Mirror Subconscious Recognition Environments. The conclusion chilled her. Repeated exposure to mirrors during REM-4 can yield neural feedback loops. In some cases, patients claim to see versions of themselves watching them, but the phenomenon degrades with repetition. Eventually, the image watching back is not them, and it learns. What begins as reflection ends as invitation. Lillian replayed Jonah's tapes again. In loop 9, he doesn't just whisper. He leans toward the mirror, smiling. Later that night, her inbox pinged. A subject line. I remember the smile. Please call attached, a contact number and a message. My name is Tyler Boyd. I was a sleep study patient at St. Augustine in 1985. I heard your podcast. I've been afraid to talk, but I woke up last night at 2:42 a.m., and I swear I saw my childhood face smiling back at me from the hallway mirror. He blinked this time. I never used to blink. Please, help me. Lillian's hands shook as she dialed the number. The voice that answered was strained, raw. I haven't slept through the night in 39 years, Tyler said. But I remember everything. Jonah Wells, Lillian said. Do you remember that name? There was silence, then a gasp. Jonah wasn't taken, Tyler said. Lillian froze. What do you mean? He left. Why? Because it told him, Tyler whispered, if he stayed awake any longer, it would come for his mother instead. Lillian's blood ran cold. This wasn't just about sleep, or trauma, or even experimentation. It was bargain-based, transactional, conditional. At 2:42 a.m., something was making a choice, and some of the children had chosen not to fight it. She checked her security camera feed from the night before. She'd installed motion detectors and hallway sensors weeks ago. The apartment building had no activity between 1 and 5 a.m., except for a 16-second clip at 2:42 a.m. Motion at her door. No visual, only audio. A faint whisper, not picked up on normal volume. But Lillian cleaned the file, enhanced it, and played it back. It was Jonah's voice. He remembers you now. June 11th, 2024. Location: Clatsop County Records Office, Oregon Coast. The building was quiet, coastal wind rattling the loose window panes. Inside the archive room, dust hung thick in the light slicing through yellowed blinds. Rows of cabinets lined the back wall, each one tagged by year. Lillian ran her fingers across the drawer labels. She'd followed a pattern. 1982, 1983, 1984. All connected to children who had vanished within 50 miles of St. Augustine. Not all were patients, but each had one thing in common. Their last known whereabouts put them near a mirror between 2:30 and 3 a.m. She pulled open the 1983 drawer, and there they were. Simon Traeger, age 10, last seen, March 5, 1983. Elizabeth Hartlow, age 9, last seen, March 5, 1983. Same night, same town, same block. But no indication they knew each other. The parents reported their beds undisturbed, no signs of forced entry. But Lillian spotted it in the original handwritten report. Both rooms had large standing mirrors facing the foot of the bed. She brought the files to a desk, scanning photos. The last known image of Simon Traeger showed him smiling at a science fair. Behind him, a mirror catching a sliver of his back. But the reflection didn't match. Simon faced forward, grinning. His reflection stood still, head tilted, eyes open too wide. Lillian flipped through the Hartlow file next. Elizabeth's bedroom had been staged for a sleepover that never happened. Her best friend, scheduled to arrive that evening, had canceled last minute due to illness. The police photos showed her bed unmade, blanket rumpled, mirror slightly angled. But the part that made Lillian stop was the mention of chalk drawings found on the wall behind the mirror. Rough figures, drawn from inside the mirror's reflection that hadn't existed in the room itself. Stick figures with hollow eyes. One word, written over and over. Waiting. Lillian left the records office in silence. She had names now. 2 more children tied to the same night. Same phenomena. But it wasn't just Jonah anymore, or Tyler Boyd, or Simon and Elizabeth. It was growing, a list, a network. Back in her studio, she built the timeline. 1982. 1 boy vanishes from a mobile sleep unit transferred from St. Augustine. 1983. 2 disappearances in the same hour, same mirror placement. 1984. Jonah Wells. 1985. Tyler Boyd, survived, never slept again. 1986. Final patient file from St. Augustine sealed. Hospital fire. She drew a circle around the year the hospital burned. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a containment effort. Someone tried to stop it. The phone rang. She answered without thinking. It was Tyler. "They came again," he said. "Last night." Lillian's throat dried. "What happened?" "I woke up at 2:42. Not from a dream, from a noise in the hallway. I thought maybe it was in my head, but the mirror in my living room had fogged." "Fogged?" "Like someone was breathing on the glass from inside." He hesitated. "I wiped it clean, and there was a handprint, a child's, on the other side." Lillian closed her eyes. "Did it go away?" Tyler's voice cracked. "It wasn't mine, and it was still warm." That night, she reviewed her Jonah tapes again. Loop 14, loop 15, loop 16. She hadn't noticed before. Each loop ends slightly sooner than the last. Each time, the mirror figure draws closer. Jonah's voice fades, then vanishes. By loop 17, Jonah doesn't speak at all. He just watches and smiles. Lillian played back the cassette Jonah had recorded in secret, tucked inside that wall vent. She isolated background sounds and heard 2 sets of breathing. Then, a faint voice. Not his. They're almost all here now. In her notes, she wrote, "The mirror is the breach. 242 is the key." Jonah didn't disappear. He crossed, and he brought something back. She opened her audio feed from the first nurse interview. Angela's voice, buried in static. Angela had said something then. A line she hadn't paid attention to, but now it clicked. "He whispered to me once, before he vanished. I asked what scared him. He said, 'It's not the dark I'm scared of. It's what remembers me when I'm not looking.'" Lillian looked up. The mirror across her apartment was fogging. Slowly, silently. And in the center, a small, pale handprint pressed softly against the glass. June 12th, 2024. Location, Portland, Oregon. Lillian Hart's apartment. The mirror was still fogged when Lillian approached it. The handprint hadn't faded. It remained, distinct and unnaturally symmetrical, the fingers slightly longer than they should be, as if stretched. She stared at it for a full minute, unmoving, heart hammering against her ribs. Then she did the only thing she could think to do. She broke it. The glass exploded inward with a shattering crack, her flashlight handle cracking through the center. Shards scattered across the floor like glinting teeth. And behind the glass, empty drywall, but not solid. She tapped. Hollow. A square section, roughly cut and patched. She pried her fingers under the seam and pulled. The panel gave way with a groan. Behind it, a dark vent shaft. No duct, no insulation. Just an opening, deep and narrow. She left the apartment an hour later, gloves on, tools in her bag, and every mirror in her home draped in cloth. She didn't sleep. At dawn, she returned to the only place where questions still led somewhere, St. Augustine's sublevels. The chute groaned under her weight as she dropped in for the final time. Her flashlight stuttered but held. She passed room 6D, past the monitoring station, and found herself standing before a vent panel she hadn't noticed before. Smaller, lower, tucked beside the base of a sealed janitor's closet. It was open. No bolts, no dust. Used. She shined her light inside. A child could crawl through it. Or something else could. She climbed in. The shaft was tight, humid, reeking of mold and metal. The light barely reached ahead of her. She crawled on hands and knees, pushing forward one slow foot at a time. The air turned colder. Ahead, the walls widened. She reached a chamber, barely 5 feet high, carved out between sub-basement concrete and foundation stone. And inside that cavity were objects. She aimed the light. A plastic lunchbox from 1983. A My Little Pony nightlight plugged into an outlet that didn't exist. A series of audio cassettes. Dozens. Labeled not with names, but numbers. Subject 5. Entry. Subject 6. Mirror breach. Subject 7. Dream loop. Subject 8. Still here. Each one stacked neatly in a sealed, foam-lined box. Preserved. Intentionally. She picked up the first and popped it into her recorder. The static gave way to a soft child's voice. Not Jonah's. This one was Elizabeth Hartlow. "I'm in a hallway. I think it's behind the mirror. The lights don't work, but there's something watching from the end. It talks like my dad, but it isn't him." A pause. "It asked me what I'd give to go home." Lillian shut it off, chest tight. She listened to more. One child cried the whole time. One simply counted, 242, 242, 242. One whispered, "It walks in mirrors, sleeps in vents. It only moves when you look away." In the corner of the chamber, she found drawings, hundreds, pages torn from lined notebooks, all childlike, all disturbing. Stick figures walking out of mirrors, stick figures with hollow heads, stick figures staring from air vents. Some pages had one sentence scrawled across the top: "It gets stronger when you don't sleep." Then she saw it, the final page, a full drawing of room 6D Jonah in bed. And above him, a figure crouched in the vent. Long arms, black eyes, its smile made of scratches. Lillian turned to leave, heart thudding. But the vent shaft behind her was closed, not collapsed, latched, from the other side. She scrambled backward, trying to find another way through, and that's when she saw the second tunnel, narrower, angled down. It wasn't ductwork. It was dug, clawed into the foundation like something had chewed its way through concrete. And down that corridor, deep in the dark, came a faint, repeating whisper. "Come back. Come back. Come back." Lillian crawled. It felt endless. Then she reached the next chamber, a secondary monitoring room no one had ever documented. Lights dead, wiring torn out. But the console remained intact. And on the main monitor, screen cracked but still barely glowing, footage played. She stared at it in disbelief. Jonah, live, not recorded, live feed. He sat in room 6D, curled up on the bed, hugging his knees. But he wasn't 8 anymore. He looked 13, maybe 14. His face pale, lips cracked. But his eyes were alert, and he looked right at the camera, then mouthed something. Lillian leaned in, rewound, mouthed it again. "Behind you." She turned. Nothing. The screen flickered again. Jonah now stood in the mirror, but she was no longer seeing it from the monitor. She was seeing it reflected from the metal walls of the vent beside her. Jonah, in the reflection, smiling, then stepping back into the dark. June 13th, 2024. Location, Portland, Oregon. Abandoned St. Augustine storage lot. The sky was gunmetal gray by the time Lillian reached the lot. It had rained in the night. The gravel was soft beneath her boots, the weeds wet against her jeans. This was the place. The off-site storage facility listed in an old memo she found buried in St. Augustine's inventory logs, never cataloged in state archives. Just a reference to secondary tape retention and a decommission date. June 15th, 1986, 2 days after the hospital burned. She stepped past the rusted gate, flashlight ready. The building ahead was nothing more than a low concrete bunker, padlocked, tagless, no markings but a faint black stencil across the door. Authorized materials only, CR. Charles Rudd. She recognized the initials from patient forms. Rudd had been the director of sleep observation. He vanished after the fire. Some said he died inside the hospital. Others said he'd fled. No one ever found a body. The door creaked open with a groan. Inside, a vast, cold room, lined with rows of steel shelving, collapsing boxes, film reels, cassette binders, everything coated in dust. But in the back, near a collapsed ceiling vent, she found a locked trunk, black metal, reinforced, built like something meant to be buried. She forced it open. Inside, beneath layers of moldy foam and rusted clamps, was a single tape. JW, final recording, do not duplicate. And beneath it, a sealed envelope. She opened the letter inside, typed, no signature. "If you found this, then you know he isn't gone. We couldn't stop it. We tried. We fed it children to buy time. But Jonah wasn't like the others. He didn't just enter the loop. He made a choice. He stayed awake. Lillian brought the tape back to her studio like it was a bomb. She digitized it herself. No assistance, no backups, no streaming. This was not for public release. The footage began like the others. Room 6D. Jonah on the bed. Older now. Mid-teens. Gaunt. Silent. The timestamp read, June 15th, 1986, 2:41:02 a.m. He looked into the camera, and this time, he spoke. You should have left it buried. His voice cracked, weak, but defiant. They think it feeds on sleep. It doesn't. It feeds on fear, on memory. It waits for you to look into the mirror and recognize it. The camera shook slightly. Jonah's eyes darted to the corner. I tried to stay awake. I counted. I cut myself. I sang songs. But the moment I blinked, he trailed off, then turned, slowly, to the mirror on the wall behind him. There was someone else in it now. Not Jonah, Lillian. She slammed the laptop shut. Her reflection was staring back from the monitor. But in the dim glow of the black screen, something was wrong. Her face wasn't moving. She was breathing, but the face on the screen wasn't. She backed away, knocked over a chair. The room went dark. The power flickered, just like it had in the old footage, just like it had in room 6D, and then, from the hallway mirror, a tap. Soft. Rhythmic. 2:42. She fled the apartment, drove without destination for over an hour until sunrise. Later that day, she returned to her equipment, played the rest of the tape. In the final moments, Jonah approached the camera. His face filled the frame. You think you're watching me? But I've been watching you, and I'm not alone anymore. He reached toward the lens. The mirror isn't a window. It's a door. The feed cut to black, and one final word appeared on screen. Awake. Lillian stared at the screen until it went cold. She understood now. The children hadn't disappeared. They'd crossed over or been pulled, and Jonah had found a way to anchor himself, not as a victim, but as a sentinel. The creature in the mirror didn't just imitate, it remembered. It fed on the fear of those who stared too long, and Jonah had become its mirror, its voice, its warning. June 14th, 2024. Location, Jonah's digitized archives, private studio server. Lillian didn't sleep. She couldn't. Every time her eyelids drooped, the tape played again in her head. Jonah's face pressed too close to the camera, his breath fogging the lens, whispering from across decades. I've been watching you. She replayed the final reel that morning, freeze-framing Jonah's last minutes. There was something strange in the room beyond him, a reflection caught in the upper corner of the mirror. It wasn't just Jonah's image anymore. It was layers, faces stacked, too many eyes, a shape behind the shape. She adjusted the exposure, rotated the image, inverted the colors. What emerged wasn't human. It was a network of faces, all children, all staring through the glass, all waiting. She opened a backup archive file she hadn't dared process yet. Jonah Wells, untitled 8audio-only.wave. No metadata, no waveform signature, just silence. Until the 2:42:04 timestamp, and then breathing, but not one person, dozens. Then a faint child's voice. He's almost through. Lillian cross-referenced the timing with the monitoring logs recovered from the abandoned sub-chamber. Every child showed the same sequence. REMFO spike at 2:41:58, body temp drop at 2:42:00, conscious brain activity suspended at 2:42, mirror-facing eye movement spike at 2:42:04. Every one of them was looking into the mirror when the event occurred. She went back to Jonah's earliest tape. Loop 1. It had seemed harmless. Him counting sheep, murmuring nonsense, crying a little, asking for his mother. But at 2:42 a.m., the white noise dropped out, and he whispered, "I can see it now. The hallway behind the wall. It's not a dream." She began calling names from her missing list. Not the families, not the police, the survivors. Those who didn't vanish, but should have. Tyler Boyd, Marina Castillo, Daniel Reese. Each of them had one thing in common. They had stopped sleeping by the time they were 9, not insomnia, survival. Marina agreed to meet. She was 45 now, gaunt, her eyes bloodshot even in daylight. She lived in an RV parked in a burned field. She said, "I remember mirrors. They kept showing me myself. But then one day, it blinked, before I did. That's when I knew." "Knew what?" Lillian asked. "That I wasn't the one dreaming. It was." Marina took out a faded photo. A girl, her, age 8, sitting in front of a bedroom mirror. Behind her reflection, a second version of her, unsmiling, watching. "I haven't looked into a mirror since 1988, Marina said. "They don't reflect, they remember." Lillian returned to her studio and began composing the next episode of her podcast. She titled it, Jonah's Wake, not Funeral, Awakening. She recorded her voice. "This isn't a ghost story or an urban legend. This is about a system designed to monitor children's sleep, and the thing that used that system to crawl through the cracks in our understanding of what dreams are." Jonah Wells was the warning. And the message. And maybe the only reason the rest of us haven't gone missing yet. She paused. "Because I think Jonah stayed behind to keep it trapped, and now..." She stared at the Loop 17 footage. Jonah wasn't blinking, wasn't aging, wasn't even trying to escape anymore. Just staring. And the mirror behind him had begun to crack from the inside. That night she made one final attempt to contact him. She set up every mirror in her apartment, angled toward one another, looped his tapes on every screen, lights off, audio calibrated to Jonah's recorded REM breathing rate. She set the clock for 2:42 a.m. and waited. When the clock ticked over, every mirror began to fog simultaneously. Lillian held her breath. From the hallway, a soft creak. Then, tap, tap, tap. She turned slowly. Jonah stood in the largest mirror, but this time he was crying. He raised one hand and pointed behind himself, into the mirror world, and mouthed something, "They're breaking through." Lillian whispered, "How do I stop it?" Jonah lowered his hand. Tears still ran down his cheeks. "You can't, but maybe you can warn the next one." The mirror shattered. Glass across the floor. Every surface fell dark. And in the silence, her recorder blinked once, then played back a single line. Jonah's voice, "Don't fall asleep. It remembers your name." June 15th, 2024. Location, unlisted safe house, Portland suburbs. Lillian hadn't slept in 4 days. Not in the usual way. Not in a way that let dreams in. She'd set up red lights across the windows, unplugged every reflective surface, taped over her laptop camera, stacked mirrors in boxes and buried them in her shed. The moment she closed her eyes for more than a minute, she heard Jonah whispering again. "It remembers your name. It's looking for a way out." She wasn't hallucinating. She wasn't breaking down. She was awake, and it knew. The recordings had grown corrupted. Every time she tried to play Jonah's final tape, it glitched, his voice stretching into something low, animal-like, a language of moans and static. Even stranger, her own voice began showing up on older tapes. Tapes from 1984. Tapes she hadn't touched. Faint, but there, a woman, her, saying, "Jonah, don't look at it." The loop had become recursive. Time didn't function normally inside that place. Whatever room 6D really was, it didn't obey clocks or calendars. Jonah was stuck inside it, not aging, not escaping, not dead. Just watching. Just waiting. That morning, Lillian received an email. No sender, no subject. One line. He's no longer behind the mirror. Attached was a screenshot, a sleep study photo dated June 15, 1986. The child in the bed wasn't Jonah. It was her. Age 8. The memory slammed into her like a train. The white walls. The voice that mimicked her mother. The slow scrape behind the mirror. A boy crying in the room next door. She hadn't remembered because she wasn't meant to. She had been part of the same trial. Subject number 17. The ones who survived didn't just escape. They were altered. Marked. At 2:42 a.m. That night, her hallway door opened. She hadn't unlocked it. The motion sensor pinged. The security light outside flickered, and in the monitor feed, a child. Standing barefoot on the welcome mat, soaked, silent, Jonah. But his eyes were wrong, too black, too still. She didn't open the door. Instead, she whispered into the microphone, "If you're hearing this, I need you to understand something. Jonah is no longer Jonah. He's the message now, a warning wrapped in flesh. He's been speaking through the cracks in our sleep. And tonight, he crossed." Behind her, every covered mirror rattled. The sound wasn't just shaking. It was knocking. Knock, knock, knock. "Let me out." She grabbed her recorder, her files, her backups, the notebook filled with tally marks, timestamps, and child names, and ran. She drove all night. No music, no mirrors. The rear view wrapped in cloth. By dawn, she reached the coast. And there, in the pink fog of early morning, she walked into the surf and dropped the tapes one by one into the sea. All but one. The final tape. The one she now played on a loop. The one with Jonah's voice. She returned to her car, turned on the recorder. Final entry. This isn't about one boy. It's not about one hospital. It's about the thing behind the eyes we close every night. The creature that waits for the light to die and the brain to forget. It speaks in mirrors, in reflections, in dreams we don't remember. But Jonah never forgot, and he kept it locked behind the glass for 40 years, until now. She hit stop, and that night, she sat alone in a motel room. She placed the mirror from the bathroom face down, put the tape deck beside her pillow, and whispered, "I won't sleep." But she did, and in the dream, she stood in room 6D. The walls were breathing, the mirror was gone, and Jonah stood in the corner smiling, his eyes full of stars. He whispered one last thing, "Now you're me." October 2nd, 2024. Location, Northwest Oregon Sleep Center. The intake nurse tapped her pen against the clipboard. "Name?" she asked gently. The little girl sitting on the hospital bed looked up, her voice quiet. "Sadie. Last name?" "Wells." The nurse froze for a second. Checked the chart. Confirmed. Sadie Wells. Age 9. Referral for chronic insomnia, auditory hallucinations during early sleep cycles, reports of recurring phrase spoken at night. "Don't fall asleep. It remembers your name." The nurse smiled faintly, hiding her unease. "Have you ever done a sleep study before?" Sadie nodded. "My dad said I'd be safe here." "And where is your dad now?" Sadie's eyes lowered. "He doesn't dream anymore." By 9 p.m. she was wired up. Electrodes on her scalp, pulse sensors on her fingers. The monitoring team logged baseline vitals, observed minor twitches during early sleep stages. At 2:40 a.m., her breathing slowed. EEG readings dipped into REM 4. At 2:42 a.m., the monitor began to flicker. The mirror on the far wall, which hadn't been there during setup, fogged softly from the inside. A shape passed behind the glass, then stopped. Inside the observation booth, one of the techs leaned closer to the feed. "Are we running a preloaded loop?" he asked. The others shook their heads. "No feed," said the lead technician. "This is live." The figure in the mirror smiled. A teenage boy, thin, pale, familiar. Jonah Wells. He raised one finger to his lips. "Shh." In the sleep room, Sadie's eyelids fluttered. She whispered something into the dark. "You were right. It's still awake." In the mirror, Jonah nodded slowly. Not warning this time. Welcoming. Back in the monitoring booth, the screen went black for 3 seconds. When the feed returned, Sadie was sitting upright, smiling softly. And on the glass beside her bed, written in reverse breath, "The door is open." Outside, across the city, every mirror surface caught a flicker, a blur, a child's breath on cold glass. And behind it, eyes, always watching, always remembering,